मित्रों, good evening. शिवराज जी आपसे माफी मांगना चाहता हूं क्योंकि मैं कन्हैया के बाद हिंदी बोलने लायक नहीं हूं और अंग्रेजियों के बारे में जितना भी कहा मैं अंग्रेजी भाषा में कुछ बोल सकता हूं आज शाम
तो सभी भाषा के पक्ष में
You know that I've been watching for the last month and a half what's been going on in this campus from close and also through my friends and colleagues. Of course, we've all seen Kanhaiya on television, we've all heard him, and as you know, JNU has been at the center of a major nationwide debate, a vital debate. You may have come here for an education, but you are also educating the nation. What is happening here has given the whole nation an education in the vital issues of dissent and democracy, the vital issues of sedition, and of course of azadi. And at the same time, here in Azadi Square, it has also given us an opportunity to think about and talk about nationalism and what that means. So I was asked here to come and talk to you about JNU and nationalism. I don't need to tell you much about JNU because you are JNU. But about nationalism, I do have a few things to say. Because I do believe that at the center of this entire debate we're facing in the nation today, at the center of it, at the heart of it, is a fundamental debate about what the nation really is, what constitutes the nation, what India is, and therefore what is national and anti-national. To my mind, this is a debate worth having. And so we should be grateful to Prime Minister Modi and his party for having overreacted the way they did, having given us a chance to actually face this debate that we are once again having tonight. You know, in my generation, we all grew up knowing that famous seminal founding speech of Indian nationalism, Jawaharlal Nehru's, on the midnight of August 1947, when he said that we have now met a tryst with destiny, a moment which comes but rarely in history, when the soul of a nation long suppressed finds utterance. The soul of the nation, that is what he was speaking for that night. And yet at the same time, the just recently departed Prime Minister of Great Britain, Winston Churchill, had once barked that India is no more a united country than the equator. Now, Churchill was rarely right about India, but it is true that there are few nations in the world that accommodate such an extraordinary variety of geography, of ethnicity, of language, of culture, of economic development, all within one space. And yet, Nehru believed passionately in the Indian nation whose soul he felt had woken that night. And he knew that it was an enormous challenge to wield together, and yes, Sardar Patel played a major role in that, to wield together, to meld into one nation, a country of such extraordinary diversity, so many princely states, so many different regions. But it was done, and today, 68 years later, we are all the children of that great experiment, the experiment that Churchill believed could never happen. And yet we know we are heirs to a very large tradition, an ageless civilization that has every kind of variety imaginable, right? A country of 23 languages recognized in the Constitution, a country of 4 major religions founded on the soil and 4 others that have come to our land from elsewhere, a country of 85 recognized political parties, 58 of which are in parliament, a country where there are 300 ways of cooking the potato. This country is therefore a land of diversity. And when we speak of the Indian experience, the first and most basic thing to recognize is that the singular thing about India is that you can only speak of it in the plural. There are many Indias, and our effort is to accommodate all these Indias in one dream, in moving forward in one way. This, I think, is what unites the remarks of Sunny and Kanhaya and myself this evening. And India, in our mind, must be an India that accommodates all of these Indias. This multiplicity, this diversity, that our democracy was supposed to enshrine and preserve. You know, when we look at our country, we can see that there is so much that keeps us together and yet so much that drives us apart. We have contradictions in our country, but we are more than the sum of our contradictions. That is the great strength of India. Let us remember that if a good RSS man in his long brown pants, hailing from the UPs, from the Hindi heartland state of UP, decides to alight at any one of India's railway stations, he might preserve the illusion that he belongs to what our journalists sometimes lazily dub the majority community. But the fact is that if he really thinks about it, there is no such thing at all. Yes, as a Hindu, he does belong to 80% of the population. But a majority of the population doesn't hail from UP, even though sometimes you might be mistaken for believing it does. A majority of the population, I'm sorry to say to some of you, doesn't speak Hindi. A majority of the population, if you come to my home state of Kerala, isn't even male. And even if he cherishes this illusion of majoritarianism, his caste puts him in a minority immediately. If he's a Brahmin, well, 90% of his fellow Indians are not. If he's a Yadav, 85% of his fellow Indians are not, and so on. So why do I harp on this? It's not to say that I am any less Hindu than those who have been trying to privilege a Hindu notion of majoritarian identity in India. It is that I recognize that my India embraces all sorts of diversities within communities and across communities, and that this is enshrined in our history. I come from Kerala, where we have the world's oldest, the world's oldest Jewish community outside Palestine. The numbers may have dwindled now, but they fled. Legend has it, when the Babylonians destroyed their first temple. Certainly we have evidence that they came when the Romans destroyed their second temple. And when they came to India and settled and they were given all their freedoms, they became the only Jewish diaspora anywhere in the world that never knew a single instance of discrimination, anti-Semitism. Christians came to India long before they went to Europe. When St. Thomas of the Bible, doubting Thomas the Apostle, landed on the shores of Kerala, it is said he was welcomed on shore by a flute-playing Jewish girl. And he converted many to his new message, his new doctrine of Christianity, which is why there are Keralites today whose families have been Christian far longer than any white and grey's family has been Christian. Islam came to Kerala peacefully, not by the sword, came in the lifetime of the Prophet, because for centuries before that, we had had ships traveling across the Arabian Sea with merchants and traders. And the message of Islam was brought so peacefully that it was embraced as well peacefully, including by a local Raja who wanted to meet the Prophet and so got into a ship and sailed off to the Arab Peninsula. Sadly for him, he didn't make it back. He passed away on the Arabian Peninsula, but he had taken with him Kerala coconuts to the Arab world, and that is why even today, on the coast of the Arabian Peninsula, right near Muscat and Oman, you can find Kerala coconut trees growing in the Arab world. And when his followers and his emissaries came back and wanted to worship in a mosque, the local ruler said, sure, there's an old disused temple, you can have it. And now the oldest mosque outside the Arab world is in Kerala, in Kodungalur. And if you go inside there, you will find one of the most gigantic lamps, as you would find in a Hindu temple, right in the middle of the mosque. This is the Indian tradition that we're all in. In fact, in Kerala, even ignorance was accompanied by tolerance, because a Kerala king, the Zamorin of Calicut, at one point issued a decree obliging every fisherman in his kingdom to bring up one child, one son as a Muslim. Why? Because he was so impressed with the seafaring skills of the Muslim sailors, the Kunjali Marikat, that he decided that he could only have an all-Muslim navy. So every fisherman had to bring up one son as a Muslim to staff the Zamorin's navy. I mean, these are all historical facts. But let me not be parochial and stick to Kerala. Think of Gujarat. I'm not talking of 21st century Gujarat. Let me tell you about 8th century Gujarat, when the Parsis, fleeing persecution in their country, came on ships off the coast of Gujarat, and they wanted to disembark in Gujarat and live there. And the king of the area, deciding that there wasn't enough room for these foreigners to come and live in his kingdom, sent an envoy to tell them that. But since they didn't have a language in common, the envoy, to illustrate that there was no room for these refugees, he took a glass of water and dropped a stone in it, and the water overflowed. And that was a way of signaling that there was no room, that if the Parsis came, the water of Gujarat would overflow. You know what the Parsi captain did? He asked the envoy to wait. He called for a glass of milk, and he carefully stirred a spoonful of sugar into it, to show that rather than overflowing, not only would the Parsis assimilate, they would sweeten the land of Gujarat. And that is why today Parsis still speak Gujarati and wear saris in that interesting way that their women do. But the fact is that this history, one can give you story after story, example after example of this history of diversity, of tolerance, of engagement. E.P. Thompson, the British historian, wrote that India is the most important country for the future of the world, because he said all the influences in the world passed through this society, and he added, there is not a thought that is being taught in the East or the West that is not active in some Indian mind. I'm glad a Brit said that. So this is the India in which I grew up, and I'm proud to say where my sense of Indianness and Indian nationalism comes from. Because I went to high school in Calcutta, where in the place where I lived, where my parents lived, you could hear the wail of the muezzin calling the Islamic faithful to prayer, literally blending with the tinkling of bells at the Shiva Mandir on the corner, which in turn was competing with the loudspeakers outside the Gurudwara reciting verses from the Guru Granth Sahib, and just around the corner was St. Paul's Cathedral. That is India. And it is a heritage of diversity that we must be proud of. In 1971, when I was in high school, we had a war with Pakistan, the war that liberated Bangladesh. At that time, the Pakistanis, the generals ruling that country, were foolish enough to proclaim this war as a jihad against the Hindu unbeliever. Well, the commander of our Air Force in the northern sector and later Air Chief Marshal of the Air Force was a Muslim, Air Marshal Latif. The commander of the army was a Parsi, General Manik Shaw, later Field Marshal Manik Shaw. The commander, Eastern Command, who commanded the troops that marched into what became Bangladesh, was a Sikh, Jasdeep Singh Arora. And the general who was helicoptered into Dhaka to negotiate the terms of the Pakistani surrender was Jewish, Major General Jacob. That is India. So this is the Indian nation of which we must always speak. It's a nation that understands that we can have differences of caste, of creed, of color, of culture, of consonant, of cuisine, of costume and custom, and still rally around a consensus. And that consensus is on the simple principle that in a diverse democracy like ours, you don't really need to agree all the time, so long as you agree on the ground rules of how you will disagree. That is where dissent comes in our democracy. We know what the ground rules are. As Kanaya says, it's the Samvidhan, the Constitution, that we all stand behind. But that Constitution gives us certain rights, and we, all of us, have the right to demand those rights and to ensure they're extended to the weakest sections of our society. You know, now the latest acid test in our country of nationalism is whether we can say Bharat Mata Ki Jai. I'm happy to say it, Bharat Mata Ki Jai. But what does Bharat Mata stand for? And should I oblige everyone to say it, and should it be proof that somehow I who say it am more patriotic than one who chooses not to say it? If two Muslim politicians decide that for them Bharat Mata represents a deification, a maternalization like a Hindu goddess, and they're uncomfortable saying it, our Constitution gives them the right to not say it. Just as it gives some the right to say it as well, and even to demand it. You were at the India Today conclave, Kanaya, the night before I was there, and the anchor began by saying to the whole audience, say after me, Bharat Mata Ki Jai. And then he said, raise your hands who all said it. I actually didn't raise my hand because I don't like saying it. And then he said, raise your hands those who refuse to say it. And I again didn't raise my hand because I don't refuse to say it. I will choose when to say it. That is the democracy. The fact of our nation's democracy is very simply expressed in that famous line of Voltaire's, I disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. That very same principle applies here too. I may disagree with what you believe in. I may disagree with the political party or the particular student organization that you happen to vote for. Kanaya knows I came here to campaign for the NSUI candidate last time against him. But the fact is that I respect and admire and defend everyone's right, his right, your right, to stand for what you believe in, and we will all stand with JNU. often accused, my senior colleague Rahul Gandhi has been accused, I have been accused of giving aid and comfort to anti-national elements. Right here in JNU. And I must say that some of the slogans reported in the media do trouble me and trouble many good people who are Democrats in our country. Not all of them. Nothing that has been said tonight troubles me. But there were things reported in the papers that I have a problem with. However, does this amount to sedition? Is it grounds to arrest 3 students, take them, have thuggish lawyers beat them in the courtroom? What kind of a travesty? What kind of a travesty are we reducing our democracy and our justice system to? As far as sedition is concerned, I actually had introduced a private member's bill back in December to amend the sedition law. None of our friends in the media noticed, because on the same day I also tried to introduce a private member's bill to amend section 377 and that one, as you know, our friends in the BJP would not even let me introduce it. So in all the discussion about that, no one noticed that I quietly introduced the sedition law. So it's there on the books of Parliament, and what I've said in that is that anything you can say against the government is constitutional. The Supreme Court has ruled sufficiently that it is only words that constitute a direct incitement to violence that can be considered sedition. But unfortunately, the Supreme Court says one thing, and the police at various levels, including apparently the Delhi police, do another thing. Now we leave it to the courts to decide what is sedition and what is not sedition. But in the meantime, we in Parliament have an obligation to change the law, and I believe we should stand up for it and amend the Sedition Act. Jawaharlal Nehru, for whom your university is named, said this is an obnoxious law, and the sooner we get rid of it, the better. As you know, the biggest victims of the sedition law under the British were Nehru, Mahatma Gandhi, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Annie Besant, Bhagat Singh. Yeah, Bhagat Singh was the Kanhaiya Kumar of his time. So we must get rid of it, and at the same time, we must affirm this idea of India, because really, that phrase of Tagore's, the idea of India, is at the heart of the problem we are facing today, because there are 2 ideas of India. There is an idea of India that says India is a land of everyone, of every group, every religious element, every linguistic element, every ethnicity that has come and of the civilization of our country. That idea of India gives everyone the same equal rights. To stand up, to criticize the government, to vote for the government, to be in the government. Everyone has the same rights. But there is another idea of India that our present ruling party is trying to promote in the name of nationalism. And this is a much more narrow idea of India. It is a doctrine that suggests that we can be a nation of one religion, one ethnicity, one language, one discourse. Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan. Now we can be proud of all of those 3 things, but we can also say India is not just those 3 things. There is a lot more to it. And because we want to see this broader idea of India embraced in our country, we want an India which has room for both Krishna Kanhaiya and Kanhaiya Kumar. We want an India which will allow people from every corner of this vast land an equal stake in our future. I worry about a university being centered on a discourse of anti-nationalism. As you know, some learned pundits have even suggested that JNU should be closed down. I can tell you that one of those who made that suggestion was a classmate of mine at St. Stephen's College. And he was a Trotskyite in those days. So the fact is that we have all sorts of youthful excesses, and many who were left-wing to a point that even Kanaya might consider extreme are today pundits advising and commenting in favor of the BJP. Student days are the days when you have to learn, when you have to debate, when you have to expand your consciousness. And you may grow up and change your views, and there's no shame in that. One of the newspapers ran a series of profiles of the last 10 or 15 presidents of JNU. And some had been elected on a leftist ticket and were now either not political or had moved towards the right. That is their privilege. Everyone has a right to change and grow. In fact, there is a famous crack by the former French President Clemenceau, who said, not to be a socialist at 20 is proof of lack of a heart. To be a socialist at 30, he said, is proof of lack of a brain. Now, we don't have to agree with him. Most of us here don't agree with him. But it's simply a point that student life is a time for you to have the courage of your convictions, be transported by the passion of your beliefs, sometimes entertain extreme ideas which you may outgrow. But India is not so weak that a few irresponsible slogans by misguided students can destroy this country tomorrow. The idea of India that I've described to you is strong enough to stand for a large-hearted and humane vision of nationalism and of what the Indian nation is all about. That idea of India will not be swayed by such a few slogans, and which may apparently not even have been shouted by students, but by outsiders on the campus that day. We don't know. We let the police investigate, that's their job. But the truth is that whatever may or may not have been said, India is larger than that. Even while they were coming to arrest Kanai and drag him off to court, there was an ex-JNU student dying on our border, fighting for the Indian flag, fighting against terrorism. The flag that he fought for, the flag that Kanaya's brother still fights for on the border, the flag that I'm proud to wear on my jacket every day as a symbol of my allegiance to this nation that I'm proud to claim as my own, that flag stands for a larger, more humane, more compassionate, more all-encompassing idea of nationalism than those of the petty voices that would reduce it to the bigotry of majoritarian chauvinist politics. Let us remember the ideals that flag incorporates. Let us remember that tryst with destiny that Nehru spoke of. Let us remember the ideals for which that flag stands, and let us remember that that flag belongs to every single section of the society, to the Dalits who have felt oppressed and discriminated for millennia, and who have sought to organize themselves on university campuses and take advantage of the opportunities that education gives them to be able to break free of their lot in life. Let us celebrate what that flag means to them. That very moving suicide letter of Rohit Vemula that you have all read, I'm sure. You know how much that scholarship meant to him, the hope it represented, and what it signified. When the Ambedkar Periyar study group is shut down at IIT Madras, what does that signify? It is a signal that the attempts of an oppressed minority to break free of their lot, to find their place in the Indian sun, is being resisted from the top instead of encouraged to grow and come up. These are things we have to fight for. We have to ensure that no one in this country has any reason to feel that the color of his skin, the food she eats, the sounds they make when they speak, the God they choose to worship or not, has any bearing on their rights in our democracy, on their rights to stand up for their own views and their own beliefs in our nation. If we accept that, if we understand that this country is held together by this timeless bond, this ancient civilization that we can have so much pride in because it gave so much to humanity, that it gave refuge to so many groups, that it allowed so many religions, so many different thoughts to flourish. A civilization that accommodated such diversity, such range of opinion, a civilization that is today sustained by a constitutional democracy that stands for certain values every one of us has a right to claim as our own. If all of this can be the Indian legacy that we can lay proud claim to, then that India, that Indian nation, that Indian idea is something we can all stand under that flag and celebrate. Frankly, I need no lessons in nationalism. I was born, as it happens, in London. I'm still entitled to a British passport. I have never ever exercised that right. I chose to be Indian. I look in the mirror and I see an Indian. I read my history and I know and believe I am an Indian. And I study the Constitution and I want to fight to remain Indian. That Constitution gives us all freedom. That Constitution's freedoms must not be abridged by pernicious sedition laws, by the overreactions of irresponsibly insensitive governments or oversensitive governments. We should, in fact, allow ourselves to understand that the magic, the strength, the greatness of Indian nationalism is precisely that it brings us all together under that one flag. I'm going to end with a story, since our friends on the other side are so fond of citing the ancient texts. Let me tell you a story from the Puranas. It's a very typical Puranic story of a sage and his disciples. And the sage says to his disciples, "When does the night end?" And the disciples say, "Why, dawn, of course." He says, "I know that. But when does the night end and the dawn begin?" So the first disciple, who's from the hot and tropical south like me, says, I know. He says, "It's when the first streaks of sunlight gleam on the palm fronds of the coconut trees, swaying gently in the breeze above the paddy fields. That is when the night ends and the dawn begins." Sage says, "No, my son." So the second disciple says, I know. He's from the cold north. So he says, "It is when the first shafts of the sun rays glint off the snow and ice on the top of the mountain tops of the Himalayas. That is when the night ends and the dawn begins." The sage says, "No, my sons." He says, "It is when two travelers from our vast land meet somewhere in this country and they realize that they sleep under the same sky, see the same stars, and dream the same dreams. And then when they embrace themselves as brothers, that is when the night ends and the dawn begins." In our history, we have seen many a dark night. But there has been dawn after dawn of freedom, of hope, And that hope has come to us through our proud Indian nation. Let us not only celebrate nationalism when India beats Pakistan in a cricket match. Somebody was sending me a graph saying that, you have this much when it's Independence Day, this much when it's Republic Day, and this much when it's Indo-Pakistan cricket match. That's how nationalism is measured in our country. No, let us measure our nationalism in our commitment to what makes our nation truly great. Our history of tolerance and accommodation, our pluralism and our diversity, the range of experiences, the challenges facing our nation to grow and develop and overcome, and at the same time, the rights we give all of us to seek to find solutions to those challenges in our own way, through our own beliefs, with our own passion and our own commitments. Let us stand for an India that is truly, truly the India that our founding fathers fought to free. They fought for certain ideals that I've tried to describe to you. We have given passports to their dreams. We can make those dreams a reality. You, the young people of India, you can make those dreams a reality. And those of us who are doing our very best to stand with you to ensure that you will have the right to stand up for what you believe in, that you will have the right to move forward to fulfill those dreams. We will always stand with JNU. Thank you and Jai Hind.
During your lecture, you have talked about the idea of pluralism, and directly or indirectly, directly or indirectly, you have attacked Sangh Parivar, the BJP, and you have said that the idea of India, which is upheld by the Congress party and the RSS and the BJP, are quite different. But I think that whatever you have said, the difference about the BJP and the Congress, the difference is there in the appearance, it is not in the course. And I would try to say 3 or 4 things. But why the Congress party? Please let me speak. So I'm saying that why I'm not. My hypothesis is, my belief is that the Congress party and the BJP may be different in appearance, but they are in their core the same party, and I will try to say 4 or 5 things why they are the same. Number 1, on the issue of nationalism and communalism. Nationalism and communalism, you say that BJP is communal and Congress is secular. But we know that Madan Mohan Malviya, who was the president of Hindu Mahasabha, and Madan Mohan Malviya were also associated with the Congress party. And Hindu Mahasabha and the Congress party were the same till 1937. And Rajendra Prasad, the great president of this country, was associated with the Hindu Mahasabha, responsible for organizing riots against Muslims in Bihar. On the issue of Muslims, for doing Gujarat, the BJP is held responsible for doing Gujarat. But what do you have to say? When Arshad Mani associated with Jamiyat ul-Hind, that played very important role in national freedom struggle. Freedom struggle said it was Yuvraj Patil who kidnapped, who was responsible for jailing hundreds of thousands of Muslims. How could
Let me say that if you go back far enough in history, my dear boy, every single person belonged to the Congress. Muhammad Ali Jinnah was a member of it. Because it was the nationalist movement and there was no restriction on dual membership. So we had members of the Muslim League. In fact, one particular figure, whose name escapes me for the moment, I think it was Dr. Ansari, chaired the All India Congress in January of 1921 and the All India Muslim League in December of 1921. It was exactly the same person. So there was no particular contradiction in those days of Hindu Mahasabha members, Muslim League members and so on being in the Congress. And indeed the Communist Party, EMS Nambudri Pahad and half the Congress members of the Congress. They broke away later, and indeed when independence came, a number of other parties also arose. As you know, the Jan Sangh came into existence only in 51, the BJP in 1980 as a successor to it, and the Communist Party split in the early 60s, and so on and so forth. So we can go on with the history of it. You still ask what is the difference? There are very many differences. I suppose the most obvious difference is the BJP is in government and we are in the opposition. So I think you can see that, that we don't share their agenda and they don't share ours. But I would say the really fundamental difference is on the idea of India. It's a battle for India's soul in many ways. We're all nationalists, but you know, loving your nation is like loving your family. You love your family, but you don't necessarily like everything about it. And there are things you want to change for the better. There are things in the family that you're prepared to fight for, fight against. Similarly with your nation. We believe that you can love your nation and at the same time want to change certain things in it, want to fight for certain rights in it. Whereas I'm afraid the BJP's idea of India is that there is one view of the Indian nation, they decide what it is, and everyone who challenges it is somehow anti-national or disloyal. In fact, on this Bharat Mata Ki Jai, President Amit Shah actually said 99% of Indians are willing to say Bharat Mata Ki Jai. So the anchor asked him, well, wouldn't you give the other 1% the freedom not to say it? He said, "No, unko samjhayenge." Now that is the difference. We don't believe in that. They do. I think that's a pretty fundamental difference to start with.